So would you like to see Sharia law in Canada replace Canadian law?
At some point it will. You know, because we have families, we are making babies. You're not. Your population is going down the slump.
That's
right?
Yeah.
And by 2060, according to Pew Research Institute, your research, by 2060, Muslims will be the biggest religious group the world over. What are you going to do then?
There's a moment in this video where I stopped thinking like a commentator. I stopped thinking about Tommy Robinson or Europe's politics or even America's culture wars, the usual left versus right arguments you see on Western media. Because from where I stand, which is outside the West, something else becomes visible. A slower shift, a deeper tension rising, a question that does not feel theoretical anymore. What happens when a society begins to change from within? Not by armies, but by belief. What happens when people openly say they want your system replaced? When they say democracy is inferior? When they say your constitution should eventually be replaced by religious law? And when they speak out not in whispers, but in public sermons, videos, and gatherings about conquest, punishment, and the subjugation of unbelievers. And yet, the response they often receive is, well, they don't really mean it. From the outside, that reaction is the most confusing part. Because at some point, you have to ask, do we believe people when they tell us what they truly believe? Or do we only believe them when it is already too late? This is what unsettled me about this video. Not the commentary around it, but the voices inside it. The imams, the speakers, and the people speaking in explicitly religious terms about power, law, and dominance.
Sharia supersedes all human law, including all national constitutions, including your American Constitution, all legal systems, all international agreements. Sharia law comes first. And Muslims must not give allegiance to any person, any institution, any country, any governing law, other than that which is ordained by Allah, and that is an Islamic state with Sharia law. Have a look at this.
Every Muslim on earth believes in the Sharia of Allah. Every Muslim on earth believes that democracy is evil and Sharia is the good.
They are on a mission to destroy the Western civilization, the liberal democracy, and everything it represents.
Say it clear! Say it loud and say it clear! We support Hezbollah here! We support Hezbollah here!
Look, Islam will enter every household, whether you like it or not. Donald Trump, inshallah, soon you will see we have a plan in place to go visit him.
A nation state will always fail for Muslims.
We would support our brothers in Iraq. That's the only way.
So you wouldn't defend America?
We would not defend America.
Not your democracy, not your liberalism, not your capitalism, not your any other ism that man has invented, other than what Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam wrote.
America is the cancer. America, the American government, secularism, democracy, capitalism, these are cancers.
We stand in full solidarity!
We stand in full solidarity
with the Islamic Revolution!
With the Islamic Revolution!
What we as Muslims want to implement here in the United States, we believe the Constitution should be replaced by the Quran.
First move that I will do, I will abolish the Constitution and I will establish the only logical and rational Constitution, which is the Quran and the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
That's right, they will do away with your constitution. They will use democracy to end democracy.
Listen carefully to the language. It is not the language of coexistence. It is not the language of equal societies. It is the language of expansion, of replacement and authority. Not persuasion, force. Not we believe differently, but this system must eventually be changed. And from an outsider's perspective, the question becomes unavoidable. Why is it controversial to take these statements seriously?
So I will ask you, everyone in the room, how many of you are normal Muslims? You're not extremists, you're not radical, just normal Sunni Muslims. Please raise your hands. Everybody, mashallah, subhanallah. Okay, take down your hands again. So it's not just these radical sheikhs then. Allahu Akbar. Next question. How many of you agree that the punishments described in the Quran and the Sunnah, whether it is death, whether it is stoning for adultery, whatever it is, if it is from Allah and His Messenger, that is the best punishment ever possible for humankind. And that is what we should apply in the world. Who agrees with that? Allahu Akbar. Are you all radical extremists? SubhanAllah. So all of you are saying that you are common Muslims. Allahu Akbar. How many of you just go to these normal masajids in Norway, the normal Sunni mosques? Please raise your hands. Allahu Akbar. So what's the politicians gonna say now? What's the media gonna say now? That we're all extremists? We're all radicals? We need to deport all of us from this country? Subhanallah.
I understand immediately that this does not mean every Muslim believes the same thing. That would be a mistake on my part. Muslim societies are not uniform. Beliefs vary widely across countries, cultures, and individuals. Even within the idea of Sharia, there is no single interpretation. Some see it as personal religious guidance, others see it as a full legal system. Some support strict punishments, others reject them entirely. So the reality is not simple. It never is. But there is a deeper question that cannot be avoided. What happens when a religious interpretation does not accept equal citizenship for those outside of it? Because at that point, we're no longer talking about private belief. We're talking about political structure. And from the outside, that is where my concern begins. There's a difference between saying, I believe your religion is wrong, and saying, because your religion is wrong, your society should eventually be governed by mine. The first is normal human disagreement. The second is a claim to authority over others. In this video, I hear both. But I also hear something more troubling in certain clips. Language of subjugation, taxation of non-believers, conquest and replacement of existing systems. And in the most extreme moments, references to violence. At that point, this is no longer theology. It's a claim about power over others. And it doesn't matter which religion it comes from. If the message becomes submit or you'll be forced to submit, then the conversation has already changed. It's no longer persuasion. It's pressure backed by threats. And that is where comparisons between religious traditions become unavoidable. From a distance, Christianity and Islam can look similar. Both speak of one God, both speak of prophets, and both speak of moral law, judgment, heaven and hell. Both trace themselves through Abrahamic tradition. So it's easy to assume they are variations of the same structure. But when you look at the central figures each tradition asks people to imitate, the contrast becomes much sharper. In Christianity, Jesus is arrested, his followers attempt to resist. A weapon is drawn and he stops it. He heals the injured, he submits to arrests, he is humiliated, beaten, and crucified. And according to Christian narrative, he responds with forgiveness. Father, forgive them. From an outsider's perspective, what stands out is not just the suffering, but the refusal to use force even when force is available. The message is not expansion through power. It is transformation through sacrifice. Historically, Christianity spread without an army in its earliest phase. It did not begin as political conquest. It began as a message carried by people who were often persecuted by the state they lived under. That does not erase later history, Christians have committed violence, built empires, fought wars, and abused power. That is undeniable. But even then, the internal contradiction remains. Christianity always contains a figure that condemns its own violence. And that's important because it means the tradition carries within it a standard that can be used against itself.
Quran 3:28. Let not the believers take the disbelievers as friends, except if you indeed fear danger from them. Listen to this.
All those who believe, do not take the Jew and the Christian as your supporter and helper. Ba'aduhum awliya'u ba'd. For they are the helpers of each other. Want to be comfortable in America. Want to be comfortable living with the kuffar. So they do these things.
This friendship of them with one another, that is not because of their love for one another, but that is based upon enmity with the Muslims. And whosoever will establish a walayat with them, such like friendship, which goes against Islam and Muslims. If that friendship of you is going against the believers, so then that is not allowed.
Can a person keep a close relationship with his previous friends and colleagues before he accepted Islam from school, etc.? No and yes. No, they are not your friends, and they are not allowed to be treated as your friends. The yes part, you keep your relations with them to call them to Islam. But them being your buddies and your friends, that's problematic.
This is not disagreement or even criticism. It is the cultivation of hostility. And this raises a serious concern because societies are not only shaped by laws, they are shaped by what people are taught to feel about each other. If children are taught to see entire groups as enemies by default, then coexistence becomes fragile. And this is where the responsibility does not fall on one side alone. Because if the response to hatred is more hatred, then nothing is solved. It only multiplies. A society cannot survive if every group is trained to despise the others. From an outsider's perspective, Western governments appear caught in a contradiction. On one hand, they defend freedom of religion. On the other hand, they struggle to define the boundary between religious belief and political ideology. Because belief is protected, but political ambition is not always harmless. A person can believe anything privately, but when religious language becomes a framework for governing others, the situation changes. And this is where the difficulty lies. Criticism of ideas is often treated as criticism of people, but they are not the same. A Muslim individual has the same rights as anyone else. That should never be negotiable. But an ideology that calls for domination or violence cannot be placed beyond scrutiny simply because it's religious. No belief system should ever be. The standard has to remain consistent. Freedom of belief, but not freedom to threaten the freedom of others.
So why should we worry about the radicals, 15 to 25%? Because it is the radicals that kill. Because it is the radicals that behead and massacre. When you look throughout history, when you look at all the lessons of history, most Germans were peaceful. Yet the Nazis drove the agenda. And as a result, 60 million people died. Almost 14 million in concentration camps. 6 million were Jews. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. When you look at China, for example, most Chinese were peaceful as well. Yet the Chinese were able to kill 70 million people. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. On September 11th in the United States, we had 2.3 million Arab Muslims living in the United States. It took 19 hijackers, 19 radicals to bring America down to its knees, destroy the World Trade Center, attack the Pentagon, and kill almost 3,000 Americans that day. The peaceful majority were irrelevant.
And that's historically true. You do not need a majority to destabilize a society. But it's also important not to collapse all Muslims into that concern, because the majority of people are not extremists. And many Muslims are themselves victims of extremist violence. So the more useful question is not who is the enemy, but rather which ideas lead to coexistence and which ideas lead to domination. That is the dividing line that matters, at least to me. From where I stand, outside the West, the concern is not simply about religion. It's about what happens when a society cannot clearly distinguish between private belief and political ambition, between faith and governance, between worship and control over others. Because when those lines start to blur, tension becomes inevitable. And the question is not whether Islam or Christianity is good or bad. The question is, what happens when any belief system claims authority over everyone else? So what do I take from these videos? Concern about specific ideas being expressed as openly as we see in these videos. Ideas about domination, about replacing political systems, about violence justified through religion. Those ideas should be taken seriously wherever they appear. At the same time, fear must not become the default response to entire communities, because that leads nowhere except division. From the outside, the most important principle is simple. Judge individuals by their actions. Judge ideas by their consequences, and never confuse criticism of ideology with hatred of people. Because once that confusion takes hold, society stops being able to think clearly at all. And the final image that stays with me is not political, it is symbolic. A man on a cross refusing to return violence with violence. Whether one believes in that story or not, it represents a very different idea of power. Not domination, but restraint. Not conquest, but sacrifice. And in a world where some voices speak more loudly about control and submission, that contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Let me know what you guys think. Is this a misunderstanding from the outside, or a reality the West is still struggling to fully confront? Let me know your sentiments in the comment section, and consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel so that we can continue figuring out whatever this is together. Until next time, from Kenya, with love, peace.